Hey everyone, my name is Reece Koetter, and for my guided tour research project, I'm going to show off a building local to my hometown of Richmond, Virginia. I brought this building to the professor because its architecture is unique when compared to neighboring buildings. While no longer in use, the old City Hall is both on the National Register for Historic Places and U.S. National Historic Landmark due to its unique Gothic Revival architecture. Built by Elijah Myers in 1894 on the corner of Broad and 10th, the building only saw short-lived success before being ridiculed, targeted for destruction, and eventually moved less than a century later. Yet, no single event nor reason led to the old City Hall's downfall, but actually a failure to meet the city's goal of symbolizing a return to power and establishing a unified democracy. In order to understand how and why the design missed the mark so much, we need to have a little bit of context about the city at the time. Virginia is one of the original 13 British colonies, and Richmond was both the capital of the Confederacy during the Civil War and current capital of the state. Earning the title of the Old Dominion, Virginia has become a historic landmark for those wishing to study the early beginnings of America. However, architectural historians have a fairly difficult time tracking down buildings built before the 19th century. Many of these buildings were destroyed not to American Revolution, but instead to the aftermath of the American Civil War. After the war, much of Richmond was destroyed in the evacuation fire of 1865. The land left behind quickly became used by Federal troops during the Reconstruction period. These troops were not only used to watch over the former Confederate capital, but they also assisted in rebuilding many landmarks and helped in establishing local government. However, when Federal occupation left in 1877, Richmond was once left again to its own devices and a period of local improvements began. Between the 1880s to 1890s, Richmond introduced streetcars and now famous Monument Avenue. Each of these projects were intended to restore a sense of authority to the city, the monuments celebrating many Southern heroes. Side note, as of today, these monuments are under constant protest by Black Lives Matter movements in the hopes to have these monuments replaced with more local and deserving historical figures. One of the most important areas of improvement would be creating a space for local government. The original City Hall, built by Robert Mills in 1816, was designed in a neoclassical style with a Doric temple front and a peristyle dome. It served as a home to former Secretary of State Edmund Randolph, in the primary place of local government in the downtown area. However, in 1870, suspicions arose about its structural integrity when the neighboring Capitol building saw a floor collapse, killing 63 people and injuring over 200. This became known as the Great Capitol Disaster, and went on to be one of the Richmond's seemingly forgotten stories, probably due to its tragic and violent nature. Because of the fear of another floor collapse, the original City Hall was closed shortly after in 1874, and construction on the new City Hall began in 1886. A new City Hall would not only provide the space to host a new government, but also symbolize the change to assimilating into the Union. Elijah Myers, an architect responsible for the capitals of Michigan, Colorado, and Texas, won a contest placing him in charge of the new City Hall's design. Myers' ambitious design, while impressive, sends a mixed message about the government and fails to meet the needs of its citizens. While it is intended to symbolize the return to power in Richmond, a city on the brink of collapse, the old City Hall ultimately fails due to a confusing architectural style that alludes to European monarchies instead of a democratic system. The ornate Gothic Revival exterior and detailed ironwork found in the atrium not only failed to reference the newly established democratic union, but was also met with backlash due to its hefty monetary cost and strain on the city. The process of constructing the City Hall was not easy nor cheap to accomplish. Proposed with a $300,000 budget, the project was completed with a total price of $1.5 million, mostly due to labor and material costs. Ironically, the construction process is actually one of the most successful aspects of the project, as it implored many local ventures. Stone gathered from the James River was hauled up to the construction site on railroad tracks. This was actually one of the last times the city of Richmond used railroads for transport within the city. They even hired many local craftsmen to complete the ornate castle-like walls. By working with northern-based work union, the Knights of Labor, African American workers were offered the opportunity to work alongside other local white craftsmen. All sorts of people worked on the City Hall regardless of race, despite the increasing Jim Crow laws being passed within this very same building. Construction temporarily strengthened race relations within the city, which would last until the project was completed after 8 years. Despite the collaborative work being put into the construction, Elijah Meyer's vision for the City of Richmond City Hall is much too ornate to appeal to the very people it's being built for. Meyer's designs are Gothic Revival, which are intended to emphasize strength, stability, and wealth. Many windows and doorways feature the pointed arch as well as ornate tracery covering every wall. He creates the sublime by having large castle downtown to contrast the neoclassical structures already present. The building occupies the entire block between 10th and 11th Street in downtown, straight across from the Capitol building. The exterior features 4 towers on the corner of each block, with a clock tower in the tallest tower. The 200-foot clock tower has since become a staple of the Richmond skyline. Its textured surface evokes the ideas of an institution and contrasts the sleek surfaces of nearby skyscrapers. Despite the solid appearance of the Piedmont stone, the interior actually features a large atrium with 4 arcades connected by a grand staircase. The space still even features the same coloring from its 1894 opening. The most prominent feature is the cast iron architecture designed by Asa Snyder. Snyder's work is found all over the old City Hall and emphasizes the regality of the space. The floor-to-ceiling Corinthian columns are covered in iron and exemplify the opulent qualities that Meyer and Snyder were trying to achieve. The royal style, while highly impressive, was quickly out of favor by the general public. Many sought to see the building destroyed, a legacy that would continue to follow it until it was finally replaced as City Hall. The old City Hall is quite out of place in the downtown area, as it is one of the only Gothic Revival buildings in Richmond. While intended to re-establish the city as both a force politically and militaristically, the old City Hall was only open for about 20 years before proposals to replace it began in 1915. In August of 1894, shortly after the building opened, a North Carolina banker jumped off a first-floor balcony, landing on the wrought iron fence below. Rumor has it that the bent picket along Broad Street is the very same picket the banker fell on. The press described this gruesome scene to the public, and it very quickly became undesirable. A Beaux Art style building was intended to be built in its place. This building would more closely represent their democratic political system as opposed to the Gothic-like structure. Many felt as if the Gothic architecture was innately British and more representative of a monarchy. Obviously, with Richmond being the first colony, many were sensitive about the association with the United Kingdom. It also didn't help that Richmond was aimed to shed its former identities following its role in the Civil War. Despite plans of this replacement falling through, the sentiment stuck all the way around until the 1970s, when threats of destruction once again were raised. The City Hall was officially moved in 1971 when an aluminum and marble skyscraper was erected to represent the modernization of the city. The old City Hall still stands to this day, with the only plans for it being more restoration. Although it doesn't serve as the City Hall anymore, it is still used by the government as state offices. The bottom floor, including the atrium, is open to the public during normal business hours. This building has become notorious for its hefty price tag and moderate success. While its design may be dated and it may not live up to its intent, the old City Hall remains one of the most recognizable landmarks in the city. The ironwork is truly impeccable and stonework impressive. The building puts forth the finest handiwork and raw material that Richmond has to offer. Destroying a building that so much time and money were put into would be a waste. Although I agree the Gothic Revival style doesn't necessarily agree with the reform sentiments of the city, the old City Hall is still an impressive landmark that can be admired for its ornate features.